Alia Johnson walked home from school, humming softly to the music playing in her earbuds. She had just finished a long day of classes and was thinking about the history test she had aced. It had been a good day, until now. As she walked down the quiet sidewalk, she noticed a police car parked on the side of the street. She didn't think much of it. Officers often patrolled the neighborhood, and she had never done anything wrong. But then, the car's lights flashed, and a siren gave a short burst of sound. Alia stopped, pulling out her earbuds. The driver's side door swung open, and a tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped out. His sharp blue eyes locked onto her, and his expression was unreadable. "Hey, you. Stop right there," he ordered. Alia frowned, confused. Was he talking to her? She glanced around, but the street was empty. Her heart began to beat a little faster. "Bob, me?" she asked. "Yes, you," the officer snapped. "Come over here." Alia hesitated. She had seen videos online where situations like this didn't end well, and she didn't want to take any risks. But she also knew she had nothing to hide. Slowly, she stepped toward him. "Is something wrong?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. "We got a call about someone matching your description acting suspiciously in the area," the officer said, folding his arms. His badge read Officer Lanning. Alia blinked. Suspiciously? What did that even mean? She had been walking home, same as she did every day. I was just coming from school," she said, gesturing to her backpack. "I live a few blocks from here." "Where's your ID?" Lanning demanded. Alia's stomach tightened. "I don't have it with me," she admitted. "It's at home." Lanning's expression darkened. "You expect me to just take your word for it?" he asked. Alia felt a spark of frustration, but kept her voice steady. "You can call my mom," she said. "She'll tell you who I am." Lanning let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "That's not how this works," he muttered. Then, without warning, he reached for her wrist. "Hey, wait." Alia yanked her arm back, startled. Her pulse raced. "I didn't do anything." "You're resisting," Lanning said, grabbing her arm more firmly this time. "Resisting what?" Alia tried to step away, but his grip tightened. A woman across the street gasped, pulling out her phone. Another passerby stopped, frowning at the scene. Lanning ignored them. "You don't get to argue with me," he snapped, twisting Alia's arms behind her back. Pain shot up her shoulders, and fear surged through her. This couldn't be happening. "Stop, please," she begged, but he wasn't listening. Alia felt cold metal snap around her wrists. Handcuffs. Her breath hitched. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. People were watching now. Someone shouted, "Let her go." She didn't do anything. Another person held up their phone, recording. But Lanning didn't care. "You're coming with me," he said, leading her toward the police car. Tears stung Alia's eyes. She had never felt so powerless in her life. As she was forced into the back seat, she tried to think. Her phone was still in her pocket, but she couldn't reach it. The only thing she could do now was hope. Hope that someone would tell her mom. Because her mom would never let this stand. Alia sat in the back of the police car, her heart pounding like a drum. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, making her hands feel numb. She wanted to scream, to cry, but she knew it wouldn't help. She had seen stories like this before, people getting arrested for no reason, but she never thought it would happen to her. As the car drove through the city streets, she looked out the window, hoping to see someone she knew. Maybe a friend, a teacher, anyone who could help her. But the streets blurred past, and soon the car pulled into the police station parking lot. Officer Lanning got out first, slamming the door shut behind him. Alia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "Stay calm. Don't panic." The door opened, and Lanning grabbed her arm, pulling her out. "Let's go," he said, leading her inside. The station was cold and busy, with officers walking in and out, talking to each other or typing on computers. Nobody looked at her. Nobody asked why a teenage girl in a school uniform was being brought in handcuffed. Lanning led her to a small desk where another officer sat. He looked up, frowning slightly. "What's this about?" "Resisting arrest," Lanning said flatly, pushing Alia forward. Alia's mouth fell open. "That's not true," she burst out. "I didn't do anything." The officer at the desk looked at Lanning, then back at Alia. He hesitated but finally nodded, writing something down. "She in the system?" he asked. "She doesn't have ID," Lanning said. Alia swallowed hard. "Please," she said, her voice shaking. "Can I call my mom?" Lanning smirked. "Not yet." Alia's heart sank. Wasn't that her right? Weren't they supposed to let her call someone? But before she could argue, Lanning led her down a hallway to a small room. The walls were plain gray, and the only furniture was a metal bench against the wall. "Sit," he ordered. Alia sat, her hands still cuffed behind her back. Lanning stepped out, closing the door behind him. She heard the lock click. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a deep wave of panic hit her. What if nobody knew where she was? What if they kept her here all night? She closed her eyes, taking slow breaths. Mom will find out. She always does. Meanwhile, outside the station, the video of her arrest was already spreading online. The woman who had recorded it had posted it on social media with the caption, "Teen girl arrested for nothing. This is wrong." Within minutes, people were commenting. Some were angry. Others were shocked. More and more people shared the video, tagging news stations and community leaders. At that moment, Alia's best friend, Maya, saw the video. Her eyes widened. That was Alia. This was real. Maya didn't waste a second. She grabbed her phone and called the only person who could fix this, Alia's mom. Danielle Johnson, the city's new mayor, was in her office when her phone rang. She answered quickly, surprised to see Maya's name. "Mrs. Johnson." Maya's voice was shaking. "Alia's been arrested." Danielle froze. "What?" "They took her. The police, Officer Lanning. There's a video." Danielle was already on her feet, grabbing her car keys. "Send me the video. I'm on my way." She didn't wait for another word. As she sped toward the police station, her hands gripped the wheel tightly. No one, absolutely no one, was going to get away with treating her daughter like this. Danielle Johnson drove through the city streets, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her heart pounded with anger and worry. She had always taught Alia to be respectful, to follow the rules, to never give anyone a reason to mistreat her. But none of that had mattered today. Someone had taken her daughter, her child, and thrown her into a jail cell like she was a criminal. Her phone buzzed beside her. She glanced at it quickly. Maya had sent the video. Danielle tapped the screen at a red light, and the video began to play. The shaky footage showed Alia standing on the sidewalk, looking confused as a police officer questioned her. Then, without warning, he grabbed her arm. Alia tried to pull away, but he forced her hands behind her back and put on the handcuffs. Danielle felt a sharp pain in her chest as she heard her daughter's voice in the video. "Stop, please." The light turned green. Danielle pressed her foot on the gas. Minutes later, she pulled up in front of the police station. A small crowd had already gathered. People were holding their phones up, recording. News reporters were arriving, microphones in hand. The video had spread fast, and now the whole city was watching. Danielle didn't stop to talk to anyone. She threw open the station doors and walked straight to the front desk. The officer behind the desk looked up, startled. "Can I help you?" Danielle's voice was calm, but firm. "I want to see my daughter. Now." The officer blinked. "Ma'am, who is your?" "Alia Johnson," she said sharply. "She was arrested today by Officer Lanning. I want to see her immediately." The officer hesitated. Danielle could see the moment he recognized her. She wasn't just any mother. She was the mayor of the city. I need to check, he stammered, reaching for his phone. Danielle leaned forward. You don't need to check anything. You need to take me to my daughter. And I need to speak to whoever is in charge here. Right now. A door opened to the side, and Officer Lanning walked in, sipping a cup of coffee. He stopped when he saw Danielle standing at the desk. Mayor Johnson, he said, raising an eyebrow. What brings you here? Danielle turned slowly to face him. You arrested my daughter, she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned with anger. Why? Lanning took another sip of coffee. She fit the description of a suspicious person, he said casually. She refused to show ID. Resisted arrest. She was walking home. Danielle interrupted, her voice rising. You handcuffed my child and locked her in a cell for walking home from school. Lanning shrugged. She resisted. Danielle took a deep breath. She wanted to yell, to scream, but she knew she had to stay in control. She wasn't just a mother. She was the leader of this city. And right now, every camera in the lobby was watching her. Take me to her. Now, she ordered. Lanning hesitated, then nodded at another officer. Bring her out. A few minutes later, a door opened and Alia stepped out. Her wrists were red from the handcuffs, and her eyes were puffy from holding back tears. But when she saw her mother, relief washed over her face. Mom, she cried, rushing forward. Danielle pulled her into a tight hug. I'm here, baby. I've got you. Then she turned back to Lanning. Her voice was ice cold. Outside the police station, the crowd had grown larger. People were talking, shouting, holding up their phones to record. News reporters were setting up cameras, waiting to hear what was going on inside. The video of Alia's arrest had spread like wildfire, and now the whole city was watching. Inside the station, Danielle held Alia close, her heart still pounding. She could feel her daughter shaking in her arms. This was supposed to be a safe city. She had worked so hard to make it better. And yet, here they were, her own daughter treated unfairly by the very system she was supposed to lead. Alia pulled back slightly. Mom, they wouldn't let me call you, she whispered. I kept asking, but they ignored me. Danielle's jaw tightened. She looked at Officer Lanning, who stood nearby with his arms crossed, looking completely unbothered. She's free to go, Lanning said, as if he had done them a favor. Danielle narrowed her eyes. That's not enough, she said. You need to explain why you arrested her in the first place. Lanning sighed, shaking his head. Like I said, she matched the description of a suspicious person. I was just doing my job. Danielle took a deep breath. Your job, she repeated, her voice dangerously calm. Your job is to protect and serve, not to throw innocent kids in handcuffs for no reason. Lanning rolled his eyes. Look, Mayor Johnson, if you want to file a complaint, go ahead. But I don't have to justify every little decision I make. Danielle took a step forward, her presence commanding the room. Oh, you will justify it, she said firmly. Not just to me, but to the entire city, because this is not going away. You have no idea who you just messed with. Lanning opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, a young officer rushed into the room. Sir, he said, looking nervously at Lanning. There's a problem. Lanning frowned. What now? The officer hesitated, then glanced at Danielle and Alia. The video. It's everywhere. People are outside protesting. And the news crews, they're all here. Danielle felt Alia squeeze her hand. The officer wasn't exaggerating. The people of the city weren't staying silent. They had seen what happened, and they weren't going to ignore it. Lanning's face turned red. Are you serious? He turned toward the window, where he could now hear voices shouting. He let out an annoyed breath. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Danielle straightened her shoulders. No, she said. What's ridiculous is that you thought you could get away with this. But you won't. She turned to Alia. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go. As they walked out of the station, the crowd outside erupted into cheers. People held up signs. Some chanted Alia's name. Others called for justice. Reporters rushed forward with microphones, shouting questions. Danielle held up a hand, and the crowd quieted just enough for her to speak. "My daughter was unfairly arrested today," she said, her voice strong and steady. "She was treated like a criminal when all she was doing was walking home. And I promise you, this is not going to be ignored. The people of this city deserve better. Our children deserve better. And I will make sure that real change happens." The crowd cheered again, their voices filled with determination. Alia looked up at her mother with pride. She had been scared, she had felt helpless, but now she knew she was not alone. And this fight was just beginning. The sun had begun to set, casting an orange glow over the city, but the energy outside the police station was still strong. People continued to gather, holding up signs, chanting, and demanding justice. News stations broadcasted the unfolding story, and social media was flooded with videos, comments, and messages of support for Alia. Danielle held her daughter close as they made their way through the crowd. Alia felt overwhelmed by everything. The flashing cameras, the shouting voices, the way people were looking at her like she was a symbol of something bigger. Just hours ago, she had been a regular schoolgirl walking home, and now she was at the center of a citywide movement. "Mom, what happens now?" she asked quietly. Danielle squeezed her hand. "Now we fight back the right way," she said. "This isn't just about you. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." They reached their car, but before getting in, Danielle turned to address the crowd once more. "Thank you all for standing with us," she said. "But this is just the beginning. We will demand answers, and we will make sure this kind of treatment stops. I will personally see to it that justice is served." The people cheered again, their voices filled with determination. As Danielle and Alia drove home, the excitement outside the station faded behind them, but the fight was far from over. Back at home, Alia sank into the couch, exhausted. It felt strange to be in her familiar living room after everything that had happened. Her backpack was still sitting near the door, just as she had left it that morning, as if the world hadn't suddenly turned upside down. Danielle sat beside her, her face serious. "I need to make some calls," she said. "This officer, Lanning, he's going to have to answer for what he did." Alia nodded, still processing everything. "Will he get fired?" she asked. Danielle sighed. "It's not that simple. There are rules, processes, but one thing is for sure, he won't just walk away from this without consequences." As she spoke, her phone buzzed. It was the city's police chief. Danielle took a deep breath before answering. "Mayor Johnson, I just saw the video," the chief said, his voice tight. "This is bad." "It is," Danielle agreed, "and I want action. That officer arrested my daughter for no reason. He ignored her rights. He didn't even let her make a phone call. This is unacceptable." The chief was silent for a moment. "I understand," he said finally. "We're launching an internal investigation. Lanning has been pulled from duty for now, but we need to go through the proper channels." Danielle clenched her jaw. "That's not enough. People are outraged. The whole city is watching. We need to show them that we take this seriously." "I know," the chief said. "We'll meet first thing in the morning to discuss next steps. I promise, Mayor, we'll handle this the right way." Danielle ended the call and turned back to Alia. "He's been removed from duty for now," she said. "But that's not the same as real justice. We have to keep pushing." Alia took a deep breath. "I just don't understand why he did it," she said. "He didn't even listen to me." Danielle's eyes softened. "Some people let power go to their heads," she said, "but that doesn't mean we stay silent. It means we stand up together." Alia nodded. She was still scared, still shaken, but now she wasn't just a victim. She was part of something bigger. and she was ready to fight. The next morning, the city was still buzzing with talk about Alia's arrest. News anchors discussed it on television, people shared their anger on social media, and protests continued outside the police station. It was no longer just about Alia. It was about justice for every young person who had ever been treated unfairly. Alia sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. Messages from friends, classmates, and even strangers flooded in. Some people offered support, while others shared their own experiences of being mistreated. "Are you okay?" Maya texted. Alia hesitated before replying. "I think so. It's just a lot." She put her phone down and looked at her mom, who was busy on her laptop. Danielle had been making phone calls all morning, speaking to city officials, lawyers, and community leaders. She was determined to hold Officer Lanning accountable. Alia cleared her throat. "Mom, what's going to happen now?" Danielle looked up, her eyes tired but determined. "The police chief is holding a meeting today. They're going to investigate Lanning's actions. But I'm not just waiting for them to do the right thing. I'm making sure they do." Alia nodded slowly. "What if they don't?" Danielle's expression hardened. "Then we keep pushing." Later that day, Danielle arrived at City Hall, where the meeting was being held. Reporters crowded outside, shouting questions, but she ignored them. She walked into the large conference room where the police chief, city council members, and other officials were already seated. The police chief cleared his throat. "Mayor Johnson, we understand your concerns. Officer Lanning's actions are being reviewed." Danielle cut him off. "This isn't just about my daughter," she said. "This is about trust. The people of this city deserve to feel safe. Parents deserve to know their children won't be arrested for no reason." One of the council members adjusted his glasses. "We need to follow proper procedures," he said. "We can't rush to judgment." Danielle's eyes flashed. "Judgment," she repeated. "My daughter was judged the moment Lanning saw her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't show fairness. He just saw a young girl and decided she was guilty." The room fell silent. The police chief sighed. "Mayor, we're not ignoring this. But these things take time." Danielle leaned forward. "Let me be clear. I will not let this get buried. The people are watching. They want answers. And if you don't take real action, it will make their voices heard." The officials exchanged uneasy glances. They knew she was right. The protests outside were growing bigger. The city was paying attention. Finally, the police chief nodded. "We will place Officer Lanning on full suspension while the investigation continues." Danielle's jaw tightened. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. "Good," she said, "but I expect full transparency. No excuses." As the meeting ended, she walked out of City Hall and into a sea of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones were pushed toward her, and voices filled the air. "Mayor Johnson, will Officer Lanning be fired? What message do you have for the people?" Danielle raised her hand, and the crowd quieted. "Justice isn't just a word, it's an action," she said. "We are demanding change, and we won't stop until we get it." Back at home, Alia watched the press conference on TV. She sat up straighter, feeling a spark of hope. Her mom was right. This wasn't over. The city had never seen anything like this before. Every news channel was covering the story. The streets were filled with people holding signs, chanting for justice. Social media was flooded with messages of support for Alia and her family. At home, Alia sat on the couch, watching everything unfold on the TV. It still didn't feel real. Just a few days ago, she had been an ordinary schoolgirl. Now she was part of something much bigger. Her mom walked into the room, looking exhausted but determined. "Alia, how are you feeling?" Alia hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's weird. People keep calling me brave, but I was scared. I didn't do anything special." Danielle sat beside her and took her hand. "Standing up for yourself, even when you're scared, is bravery," she said. "You didn't ask for this, but you're handling it with strength. And because of you, Real change is happening. Alia nodded slowly. Do you think Officer Lanning regrets what he did? Danielle sighed. I don't know. But that's not what matters. What matters is that he faces consequences, and that we make sure no one else goes through what you did. Just then, Danielle's phone buzzed. It was the police chief. She answered quickly. This is Mayor Johnson. The chief sounded tense. We've made a decision. Officer Lanning is being officially removed from duty. Danielle's breath caught. You're firing him. Yes, the chief confirmed. The investigation found that he violated department policy. He had no legal reason to arrest Alia, and he didn't follow proper procedures. We can't allow officers like that to wear the badge. Danielle closed her eyes for a moment, relief washing over her. That's the right decision, she said. But this isn't just about one officer. We need real reform. More training, better oversight. I agree, the chief said. Let's meet tomorrow to discuss next steps. After hanging up, Danielle turned to Alia with a small smile. Lanning is fired, she said. Alia's eyes widened. Really? Danielle nodded. But this isn't just about him. We have to keep fighting for real change. Alia thought for a moment. Can I help? Danielle smiled proudly. Of course. Your voice is powerful. People are listening. That night, Danielle and Alia went to a community meeting where people gathered to talk about what needed to change in the city's police system. When Danielle finished speaking, she turned to Alia. Do you want to say something? She asked gently. Alia hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready. But then she looked at the faces in the crowd, people who were supporting her, believing in her. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. I was scared, she admitted. When Officer Lanning grabbed me, I felt powerless. I thought no one would listen to me. But I was wrong. You all listened. You stood up for me. And now I want to stand up for others. The crowd erupted in applause. Alia smiled. Maybe she hadn't asked for any of this, but now that she was here, she was going to make it count. The days following Officer Lanning's dismissal were filled with hope, determination, and change. The protests outside the police station slowly turned into peaceful gatherings where people discussed solutions. Community leaders, students, and parents all came together, determined to make sure no one else experienced what Alia had gone through. At school, Alia was nervous about going back. She wasn't sure how people would react to her now. Would they treat her differently? Whisper when she walked by. But as soon as she stepped into the hallway, she was met with smiles, nods of respect, and even applause from some of her classmates. You're amazing, Maya said, walking beside her. You actually made a difference. Alia shrugged, feeling a little shy. I just told the truth. That's exactly why it mattered, Maya replied. As the school day went on, teachers talked about the importance of standing up for what's right. Even in history class, the lesson for the day was about young people who had helped change the world. Alia listened closely, realizing that she was now part of something bigger than herself. Meanwhile, at City Hall, Danielle was working hard to turn this moment into lasting change. She met with police officials, legal experts, and community activists to create new policies. One of the biggest changes was a new rule. Police officers had to take extra training on fair treatment and respecting people's rights. Another rule made sure that officers couldn't arrest minors without immediately contacting their parents. These changes weren't just words. They were steps toward making sure no other child felt as powerless as Alia had that day. One evening, as Danielle and Alia sat together on the couch, they watched the news. A reporter was talking about the reforms being introduced in the city. This all started because of one brave young girl who refused to stay silent, the reporter said, and because of a mayor who fought for justice, not just for her daughter, but for the entire community. Alia looked at her mom. We really did it, didn't we? Danielle smiled, wrapping an arm around her. We did, but the work isn't over. Change takes time, and we have to keep pushing forward. Aliyah nodded. She knew her mom was right. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. A few weeks later, Aliyah was invited to speak at a youth leadership event. At first, she wasn't sure what to say, but when she stepped onto the stage, the words came naturally. "I never wanted to be in the spotlight," she admitted. "I was just a girl walking home from school. But when something unfair happened to me, I had two choices: stay silent or speak up. I'm glad I spoke up. And I hope that if you ever see something wrong, you'll speak up too." The audience clapped, and Aliyah felt something new inside her: confidence. She wasn't just a girl who had been arrested unfairly. She was someone who had helped make a real difference. As she walked off the stage, her mom was waiting for her with a proud smile. "You're a leader, Aliyah," Danielle said. Aliyah smiled back. "I learned from the best."